This is Katie, co-host of Coffee with Keith and Katie. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Madeline, host of Crowned and Dangerous here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you are done with this episode, I hope you'll come back to check out my show, Crowned and Dangerous, where Jessica and I talk about our time in the pageant world. A new show comes out bi-weekly on Thursdays. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Crowned and Dangerous. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hey everyone, welcome to Beauties and Headcanons. I'm Emily, and I'm here today with Lindsay and our special guest LeeAnn, and we're here to talk nerdy to you. Our guest LeeAnn works in movie production, specifically post-production, and we're going to let her share a little bit about that. And we'll also be discussing what it's like to be behind the scenes of movie magic. So LeeAnn, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thanks for having me on. I'm LeeAnn. I live and work in Los Angeles, California. The last movie I worked on was Avengers Infinity War, and I've also worked at Fox and Warner Brothers, Malpaso specifically there, but I'm currently at Marvel Studios. The fandom that really first got me into wanting to be a part of movies was Lord of the Rings. I'm very big into Lord of the Rings. My dad read the books to me when I was younger and pulled me out of class so that I could see the movies when they came out.
That's awesome.
And I have watched every single behind the scenes on every single extended edition of Lord of the Rings.
Cool.
I'd say that's probably one of my, closest to my heart fandoms. But I'm also really into Star Wars and a lot of animated shows currently. I'm kind of going through an animated shows kick. And
Nice.
then, of course, Marvel. So I'm very excited to be where I am now.
That's awesome. Thank you. So we're going to kind of put you through the ringer, I guess. Because I am completely like blank slate when it comes to what goes into making a movie. Like I totally appreciate all of the personnel that it takes and all of the time and the effort that everybody has to put forth to make a movie what it is, but I have absolutely no idea what all of that is. What is your favorite thing about working in movie production? And maybe you could first define the difference between pre-production and post-production too, so that we all the noobs like me kind of understand.
Yeah, of course. So production is different, between film and television, of course. So for today, I'm just going to focus on movies.
Okay.
In movies, we're going to generally divide it into three categories. You've got pre-production, and that's everything that happens before you go to set, basically. So
Okay.
that's the writing, it's the hiring all of the personnel, it's the casting of the actors, it's visualization, it's storyboarding, creating a schedule, all of that really important stuff, financing, etc. And pre-production is one of the most important and oftentimes ignored parts of the process, because you can actually create a much more efficient movie production machine if you put more time into pre-production.
That makes sense.
Yeah, of course. But it's not the glamorous part of it. So people oftentimes will jump straight into production without doing as much planning as they should. Pre-production is super important. The next part is like physical production. And so that's when you're on set, and that's, all the actors and the cameras and the sound and everybody's on set together actually shooting the movie and shooting the scenes. That oftentimes looks a lot different than it comes out on the screen. But I'm sure that you've watched your fair share of behind the scenes footage. So, you've seen the green screens, and there's a lot of tricks and tools. I've got some friends that also work in like prop building, and all of that stuff is really cool. And I love seeing how all of these pieces come together in physical production. I work in post-production, specifically in editorial. So editorial is the editors of the movie. So that means they take all of the raw footage that was shot during physical production, and they cut it up and they make a movie out of it. So, I mean, we use words like cut and like cutting room because it's based on back when it was actually physical film and you'd have to like, take your scissors and chop it up and put it together to make a movie. But we don't actually cut film anymore. Some places still do.
Sure.
But pretty much everywhere in the industry is digital. So it's a lot of software.
Sure. Yep.
So you've got editorial and you've got visual effects also in post-production. And then you also have things like music and score and sound editing, all kinds of stuff that happens after physical production is over. So my job personally, I work as an editorial production assistant. So that means that I am the support for pretty much anyone that is in the editorial space. So on any given day, that could be the executives, it could be the directors. Sometimes we have like sound alikes, or we have the stars coming back in to do recording of dialogue that goes in afterwards. There's all kinds of stuff, but basically anybody that's in an editorial space, I'm support for them. So that's coffee, that's food, that's office supplies, that's whatever I need to do to make them comfortable so they don't need to think about anything and they can just focus on doing what they do.
It seems kind of silly because you're like running errands all the time, but it's also like super important because otherwise they're like, trying to do too much all at once, and then you're taking things off of their plate so they can focus on what they need to do.
Definitely one of the more thankless jobs in Hollywood, but it's also a really unique position because you do generally get to see a bit more of the process than somebody who's maybe in one specific role is. And production assistant, that's PA is short for production assistant, so I might say that. So PAs are all over the industry. So you've got office PAs, which is what I am because I work in an office. But then you also have set PAs who get to do stuff on the set, like, carrying tables and chairs and other exciting things like other exciting things like locking up the set, which means sitting outside and making sure nobody walks in. It's like a very glamorous job, certainly. But what's kind of cool about it, though, is that pretty much everybody in the industry has gone through it. It's definitely one of the ways that most people get their foot in the door. You start at the bottom and you work your way up. And I feel like the thing that we hear about a lot is, the made it overnight kind of stories, because those are more exciting to hear about, like the people who made a short film and then they were hired to do their own film from that. And it's like, oh, wow, this is a really cool person. But like not everybody, hardly anybody makes it that way. Pretty much everybody starts as an assistant or a producer's assistant or a director's assistant or a PA or in the mailroom. Everybody starts somewhere. And so it's kind of nice to know that most of the people that are above you have been in your position at some point.
Right, and have done your job and have know exactly what it was like. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's actually like kind of comforting to know.
So I think it's really cool too, because it's almost like if you keep people happy and you keep the ball rolling and keep them from having to do these other things, then they're able to be more productive in what they're doing too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny because I remember at one point, one of the assistant editors was talking to me and was saying that she didn't think the directors knew what her name was because, like, she's only ever been in the same room as them like once or twice. Whereas, like, they know my name because I send out the lunch menu every day and like I'm bringing their coffee to them. So it's one of those things that it's interesting because you do end up having a good bit of face time with these people who are in positions of power on the movie. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, it is kind of cool that way.
So what's your favorite thing about working as a production assistant?
Being a production assistant, I feel like I've already gone over this a little bit with the being able to see all the different parts of the process, as well as just, it feels like you're definitely a part of the team. And I know that that's different on different sets and in different offices, but for where I am, I have this very supportive crew that I work with, and I do feel valued there. I know it's very easy for a production assistant to not feel valued in their role because it is a lot of thankless work. But I think that where I am currently, you know, when I do good things, people say thank you, which is kind of a small thing, but it's really important to making me feel like I am an important member of the team, which I am. It's just easy to forget sometimes when you're getting coffee for everybody.
Understandably, it's not to necessarily cheapen what you do or what I do. It's kind of like being the mom of the production team, like just taking care of all the things that need to get done, but are like side
Not quite.
things.
I think I would say it's closer to being the nanny of the production.
Okay.
So
Okay.
somebody else is the mom and the dad, and they're telling me what I need to do to make their lives easier.
Okay.
So that would be like
I get it.
That would be like my post supervisor and my post coordinator on Infinity War. I actually did call them mom and dad, even though it was two dudes. But
Hey.
it was. I actually, when the coordinator left at the end of the show, I got him a mug that said "Mom" on it, and he was so
That's
pleased. He
hilarious.
almost cried. It was great. But yeah, so they're very supportive, but oftentimes, you know, they're telling me what needs to get done, and then I'm figuring out the most efficient way to do it. So aside from doing all of the food and coffee and office supplies and all of that kind of stuff, one of the things that I have kind of been responsible for is occasionally Marvel, especially when we're closing out a show, will do food truck days for our crew. And so I've gotten, so we're on the Disney lot in Burbank. And so I've gotten very efficient at working with the events coordinator for Disney, as well as various vendors to get food trucks on the lot for our crew. So that's a lot of fun and paperwork and logistics and stuff like that. But it's stuff that I would never have had the need to do if I weren't in this role.
Sure, yeah. All the logistics, like, yeah, that takes a lot of coordination.
Oh yeah, we just did actually this last week. It's been crazy, but we did a Marvel-wide food truck day for like a holiday treat.
Whoa.
And so we have 3 shows that are, sorry, I keep saying show, I should specify. I don't mean a TV show. A show is just kind of like the word for the project that you're working on. So it can be a TV show or it can be a movie. So when I say the last show I worked on was Infinity War, I'm not saying that that's a TV show. I'm saying it was a movie. Anyway,
that makes sense.
So there's 3 shows that are currently on the lot in post-production, and then there's a couple more that are in pre-production. So they're much smaller crew. But then there's a ton of people that are working in Marvel Studios corporate. So that's the executives and legal and franchise and IT and tech ops and
holy cow.
Security, so it was a lot of people, and somehow I ended up being in charge of putting together this whole food truck day. So it was a huge mess, but it was also a lot of fun, and we did end up pulling it off, and I think that everybody had fun and everybody did get food, so that was good.
That's the best part, that everybody got food.
Everybody got
kind of
food.
What's most important, right? Like,
yeah,
you gotta make sure everybody got fed.
The longer I spend as a PA, the more important food becomes in my life.
Hey, I'm okay with that. That sounds like a good life.
I mean, we also do we do breakfast burrito Fridays. That's a Marvel thing. Just every show in post-production does breakfast burrito Fridays.
That's awesome.
What other food stuff is there? I feel like there's just a lot of random food stuff. I have to place the lunch orders every day, and it's like the most stressful part of my day. It sounds very small, but it's like when you're juggling orders for 20-something people, and you're trying to get them in time so that you get it to everybody in time. And it's just I've had nightmares where I wake up in a cold sweat because I was I was at the restaurant and they messed up all the orders.
No.
And it's like those those nightmares you have, like when you wake up and you're just like, oh, I didn't study for my test, and then you're like, I haven't been in school for years.
Yes.
Right?
But
Oh.
except that I'm currently, going through a time where this nightmare could actually come true.
Right.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Well, and when you think about it, food is so important too. Like it's something that has to happen. And if it doesn't happen, people can get really hangry. Like,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
just,
Well, especially, and this is something that I think not many people know. So, like, a typical day of work for most people is like a 9 to 5. Now, a 9 to 6 is becoming more standard. A typical day in any production person. Okay, I need to rephrase that. Sorry. A typical day for anyone that works in movie production is 12 hours. There's a 12-hour standard day, basically. There are some other positions that have a 10-hour standard day, but most people are working off of a 12-hour day. When we get into the thick of things, so like last year on Infinity War, starting in January, I was working 12 to 15 hours every day, and I was working 6 or 7 days a week. And so it's a lot of time, and I would even come in and my supervisor would already be in there. And then when I would leave for the day, he would still be there. So it's these very, very long days for everybody. So food does become very important when you realize that people are there for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. So making sure that people are well fed is kind of important if you're expecting people to spend all day at work. This probably wasn't what you were expecting when you were asking about movie magic, though. So
no, but it's,
No, I think part of what we're getting at is like, so you get to see the transformation too, like from like, because since you're going in and out with all of the people throughout the whole process, like you said, you do get to kind of be in contact with everything throughout it, and so you kind of see the transformations of everything.
I'll walk you through kind of something that I was able to see a little bit more of recently. So sometimes there are reshoots or there are other reasons why they will have a set day that I will have to be present at, or the other production assistants will have to be present at. So on a set day, it's normally motion capture, what we're doing this late in the game. And so motion capture is, the ball suits that people put on, and they've got dots on their faces and everything like that. And they go through the scenes and interact with props. And then that is all animated afterwards.
Oh, okay.
So what's really interesting about that is the scenes are actually animated by something that's called pre-visualization or previs beforehand. So it's basically like animated storyboards, kind of, where they will animate the entire scene the way they want it to happen. So that'll come usually from like some stage direction or something that's in the script itself, or something that the directors and the executives and the editor came up with that they want to happen. And so we have on-site previs crew who's actually in our office with us. There's about 20 of them right now, I think, just various previs artists, and they do a 3D animation of what the scene's going to end up looking like. And so when we do a motion capture day on set, the actors or stunt people or whoever's going to be recording the motion capture will come in, and they will actually watch that scene that was animated by the previs crew and then recreate it with themselves. And then what happens is, and so then once the scene's been recreated by the actors, then the motion capture can be pulled into the system and then sent out to different vendors who will then animate it for visual effects.
And that's the movie magic.
That's the movie magic. But then again, this is very specific to the Marvel movies that I have been working on lately. Not everything is as visual effects heavy. We had in the last movie, I think we had 4 or 5 characters that were just completely made in animation, like that weren't. I mean, they were actors at the core of them, but they were completely animated. And that's unusual as far as the general movie landscape. so something that I worked on that didn't have any visual effects, I don't think, on it was when I was working at Malpaso, that's Clint Eastwood's company at Warner Brothers. I was working on the 1517 to Paris, which came out at the very beginning of this year. So that one, and Clint Eastwood in general, he has a very efficient shooting style. So I was actually on his show from pre-production through post-production, and it was 9 months, which is very fast, fast scheduled. So they brought me on. I mean, they had the script already, but when I came on, it was very, very early in the process. And so I got to be in the office through them staffing up their entire show, and then the casting process and all of that. And then they shipped out somewhere else to set. So I was back in the editorial office when they were on set in Atlanta. And then I think they also went to like Venice and Rome, maybe. I don't remember. They went somewhere in Europe as well. But I stayed back in the office because that's where the editors were. And so what was really interesting about that process is just how fast everything moved. Because for him, it was like, I think that he got that script in like January or something of last year. And then I came on in April or May. I think it was May. Maybe it was April. I don't remember. I came on and they were finishing up pre-production. And then their first day of shooting was in July, I think. And then I think they only had like 40 shooting days or something like that. Something crazy. Whoa. They were in 3 different countries, and they only had.
And they were boom, boom, boom.
Yes.
Wow.
Clint Eastwood's very well known for being very efficient with his shooting schedule, because he'll record the practice takes, and he, when he says the shot is right, then it is, and then they move on to the next one. So
that's fine. I to be honest, that sounds exactly like the person I kind of imagined him to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to admit, Clint Eastwood is kind of like one of my idols. Mm-hmm. What is the average amount of shooting days?
It's so vastly different depending on the movie and the kind of movie, and whether it's a big budget or a small budget or a studio movie or an independent. It really, really, there are so many factors that go into it. I don't think that I could give you an average. I can say that Infinity War and Endgame were in Atlanta. That was before I came on. I came on.
What's funny is I have a friend who was talking about Atlanta and like literally wanting to work in Atlanta because of those movies being shot there. So I think it's really cool that so much is happening there.
Oh, do you want to talk about runaway production? That's another thing we can talk about.
Of course I want to talk about that.
Okay, so runaway production is one of the reasons why a lot of big movies are being shot in Atlanta, and also New Orleans has their fair number of them as well. But you'd think of, movie production as being like a Hollywood thing, but it's very expensive to do anything in Hollywood because there's a lot of unions and there's a lot of high cost of renting different things.
Yep,
and so what certain places will do to compete with the convenience of shooting in LA, because all of the post-production or all of the production offices are in LA, so it's very convenient to shoot in LA. So what other places will do is they will offer tax breaks to production companies in order to shoot in different places. So Georgia has a very generous tax incentive to production companies that want to shoot in Atlanta, or the surrounding areas. So it's pretty interesting how much that has to do with it. But when you're thinking about the scale of some of these larger movies and what their budgets are, while a little bit of a tax break doesn't seem like it'll go a long way, when you're talking in these huge quantities of money, it really does make a difference.
I bet.
Atlanta's kind of the top place right now, but it's always changing based on based on the states and based on the places that are willing to offer tax incentives. There's also some TV shows I know that will shoot in other countries because the countries will offer them. And there's also like lower cost of living and lower, catering expenses and things like that. So I know some shows that shot in like South Africa. There's some that have done in Southeast Asia, and then there's up in Canada. There's a couple of
I was
hot
gonna
places.
say, I know a couple of my favorite shows are shot in Canada, I think.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. 'Cause, I mean, well, and depending on what each show or movie needs, that the location kind of would provide that too.
Well, what's interesting is pretty much, and this is the real movie magic, is that anything that you could want to portray, you can pretty much do it anywhere. So, because you can take a school and you can make it look like a church or like a government building or like a police station. It just really depends on what furniture you put in there and what angles you're shooting from. So
That's true. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, just to use an example, I guess you can really create any space you want to on a stage. So on the big lots around LA, and I guess anywhere, but I'm only familiar with the ones in LA. They have these big stages. That's basically just a huge empty room, just huge. And they can build anything in there. There are mills, so like carpenters on every lot, and they'll build basically whatever you need. So it's kind of fun walking around the lot sometimes when the elephant doors are open, the really big ones on the side,
Oh,
and you can
yeah.
kind of like poke your head in and be like, looks like it's the principal's office today. Or like poke your head in and it's like, oh, it's a New York street corner.
Right. Oh,
So it's just,
funny.
yes, that's interesting to see because they can build anything. And some of the bigger lots, Disney is a very small lot, but some of the bigger lots like Fox and Warner Brothers have what's called the back lot, which are outdoor standing sets. Um,
Okay.
so in the back lot area, you've got like sometimes a Western stage, or not stage, just a Western street setup, or actually, have either of you been to like Universal Studios?
Yeah.
So in LA, Universal Studios has a backlot tour where they actually put you
Oh,
in.
cool.
They actually put you in a golf cart and drive you around their backlot. And so you get to see their Western Street or their New York Street or their they have like a European small town, which is
Oh,
just all
nice. Yeah.
cobblestones and
Oh,
gelato
I
shops
love
and
that.
stuff. So it's just really interesting because you can kind of just go around and it changes based on what angle you're looking at the street and what you're seeing. So that's I think the real movie magic is figuring out how to do as many places as you can in the same place.
That is really, really cool. Like like you said, figuring out the logistics of what angle would make it appear one way, and then you could use a different angle to make it appear completely different because you're just
Mm-hmm.
coming from
Yeah.
one side or the other. That is really cool. And
Mm-hmm.
like the imaginations and creative minds to build all of that and the logistics of it all, that's really cool.
Yeah. I love seeing how they end up putting as many places in one spot as I do. I just think it's really cool.
Yeah,
Um,
no, it totally is.
Something that's kind of similar movie magic wise, but maybe a little bit more boring. But interesting to me is actually like the production scheduling. So there's some really interesting things that happen when you're working with actors because actors are expensive generally. But you have different kinds of contracts for actors. So you have them on like week to week scheduling or day to day scheduling, depending on how long they're on. So like a daily rate is going to be more per day than a weekly rate. It's like you're keeping them on a retainer for longer, but you need to schedule all of your scenes that have the same characters in them together, so that if you're keeping people on a weekly rate, you don't want to like pay them for them to not be in scenes for a couple of weeks and then have them have like one day at the end. So this is from one of the production classes I took in college. We had to make something that's called a day out of days. which is just a complete schedule of the production. And then you have to go through all of your actors and you have to figure out how to shuffle them around so that the ones that are in the scenes together are all working on these days. And then the ones that have solo scenes are doing them either at the beginning or at the end. And there's a lot of finagling that has to happen in order to make it efficient. And then you also need to keep in mind stuff that's like, oh, are these interior or are they exterior scenes, or are they daytime or nighttime scenes? And so, you know, are we depending on it actually being sunny out, or what happens if it rains? You know, there's all of these different things you have to take into consideration.
That is really cool. I've kind of thought about that, like watching movies and stuff. Like I wonder sometimes like which scenes get shot at the same time as other scenes, or you know, like depending on the location or depending on who's in them and that sort of thing. So like that, you kind of explain what I've been wondering about, which it makes a lot more sense to have, you know, the personnel all together at the same time so that they can just be kept in a big cluster pay wise rather than spending too much money to have people available when you don't really need them.
Yeah. And then there's other stuff too, to take into consideration. So other big costs are like if you're renting equipment, which most people do rent equipment. There's sometimes more expensive equipment that you might need. So like say you need like a dolly, that's for those nice gliding shots and stuff like that. So say you want that in a couple of scenes, you're going to want to cluster those scenes together over a couple of days so that you can just rent the dolly for a couple of days and then return it. Or if you're doing a big battle scene and you want to have a bunch of different camera angles for it, and so you're going to have to rent all of those different cameras.
Oh boy.
Then you're going to want to make sure you're scheduling your big fight scene all at once, not like a couple days at the beginning and then a couple days at the end, so that you can make sure to get all of your equipment rentals in place as well.
Yeah. So logistics are really, really important. That makes a lot of sense.
They really are. That's something that I've always thought is funny, is that there are so many movies about making movies, but none of them are right. Like none of them actually show what it's like to make a movie. And of course, I'm not saying my experience is not universal, obviously. Like maybe there are movies that work differently than the ones I've been on, but this is just my personal experience, and every show is so different.
Well, and like to me, I've seen movies about making movies or about making music, and they're always in the studio like recording something. It seems like that's all they ever do, but I'm sure obviously you've explained there's so much more that goes into it, so it's like, well, okay, of course they wouldn't make a very great movie about somebody scheduling the logistics behind every filming day. But
it's so funny. I feel like it's kind of ruined me a little bit, because like I'm currently working on rewrites of a movie that has a movie making process in it, and I keep on doing things like, okay, but realistically you couldn't do post-production that fast, and it's just like it doesn't matter, we can suspend disbelief, nobody actually knows except for people that are actually working on movies. But you know, there's little things that are like, okay, so if we say that they have this long to do this, is that realistic? No, it's not realistic at all. And then it's like, but you know, I have to remember to give myself a little bit of leeway. I'm like, I don't need to address the entire production schedule. Nobody really cares. Focus on the plot.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, it's not your job to make their production schedule.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's funny.
Do you have a favorite thing that you've worked on? Like a favorite, I guess being in an office, you're a little bit secluded from things, aren't you?
I mean, if you're talking about things as being like set, then yes, I am not on set often. I have been on set 2 times for this movie that I'm working on, and then I'm going to be on set at least once more in January. And then there's like ADR. That's what is it? Automated dialogue replacement. I think that's what that stands for. That's when people will come in to like dub over their lines. Like for like TV edit Singing in the Rain. Singing the movie Singing in the Rain. Yeah, so like that kind of what they're doing at the end, where they're putting in her voice. So it's like if you've decided that you want to change the lines, It's
Yeah.
getting that in there.
Like if they
And
need to make something TV friendly or something and they need to like edit out a swear word.
yeah, or if
Okay.
they or sometimes, and this might just be like a Marvel thing, but things are very fluid here, and they're constantly changing. And so sometimes they'll be like in the cutting room and they'll decide like, okay, we need a different line here, or they'll like
Okay.
rearrange the whole movie and be like, okay, in order to make this make sense, we need this person to say this thing. And so then you bring them in,
Sure.
and then you have them say that line, and then it goes
Gotcha.
in, and then
Gotcha.
it makes sense suddenly.
Oh, the movie magic just, we put something
Movie magic.
together.
Yeah.
Movie magic happens.
Yeah, one of my one thing that's kind of fun is that you do temp ADR sometimes. So like there is a character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that some people in the editorial think that I sound like, and so I get to do her temporary ADR lines. And then she'll come back in later and re-record over them. But it's kind of fun because like for the current cut of movies, like my voice is in there for a little bit.
Oh, that's cool.
But
That's
so
awesome.
a couple screening audiences have heard me as this character, which is kind of funny.
Okay, so if you had your choice of any movie, like past, present, future, but ones that you haven't worked on or are currently working on, what would you love to work on?
I mean, I would love to work on something that I had written.
That would be cool.
I mean, I feel like that's probably the ideal situation, is because so I'm an aspiring writer, and someday I hope to be able to work on something that is my own story and my own characters. I think that would be really special and really fun.
Oh, I wanted to ask, you had said that a lot of people who work as production assistants end up being something higher up. Do you have a goal as to what you want to do?
I mean, I want to write. So there's not really a direct path to being a writer, unfortunately, in Hollywood. The closest thing to a direct path is if you're a production assistant and then you get hired to be a writer's PA. That's on a TV show. They have writers' PAs specifically. Those are the ones that they just take care of the writer's room. So doing the coffee and doing the food and the office supplies, all that stuff for specifically the writer's room. And then sometimes if you're good enough as a writer's PA, they will promote you to writer's assistant, which means that you then get to sit in the room and you get to take notes and stuff. And sometimes they'll let you like pitch ideas and stuff like that. And if you do a really good job as a writer's assistant, then you can sometimes get the bump up to staff writer, and then you're actually getting paid to write. So that's the closest thing to a direct path, and one that I would be thrilled if that were to ever happen to me. But other than that, a lot of it's like, entering contests and fellowships and trying to get representation, which is very, very hard to do.
How do you get representation?
So there's a few different ways that you can go about getting representation. I just mentioned contests. There are a lot of writing contests out there. There's a couple that are more prestigious than others. And with those ones, specifically the Nickel Fellowship, which is run by the Academy of Motion Picture, the Oscars people. I forget what it's called. So that's called the Nickel Fellowship, and that's like probably the most prestigious one out there. They actually, even the winners of that even get paid for the year that they have the fellowship, so that they can shop things around. And winning or being a finalist there pretty much guarantees that somebody is going to look at your stuff. So a lot of people end up getting representation. So that's a agent and or a manager. And those two things are different. And I can talk about that if you want. But so that's one way that you can go about doing it. And then other ways are knowing people. That helps a lot.
Yeah, I bet it would.
Knowing people goes a long way in this industry. And it's not even necessarily like a nepotism type of thing, or like it's sometimes a nepotism thing, but it's not always. It's basically just like having somebody that's willing to vouch for your abilities. basically.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Exactly.
like
Somebody who's
somebody in your corner. Like I started my PA journey working in a lot of reality television. Oh, you were asking about favorite things I've worked on. One of my favorite things was the first paid job I had in Los Angeles. I was a production assistant for a cooking show. And it was great because at the end of the day, somebody had to take home all of the uncooked food and all of the leftover food.
Oh, yes.
And so I remember coming home and just like there was like prosciutto and like a lobster and
Oh, my.
scallops and like most of a bottle of white wine because somebody had used 2 tablespoons in a recipe. And I just like
Oh,
came home and I
wow.
put it down on the table. And my partner, I was like, bringing home the bacon.
Literally.
Literally. No, I did. I actually, at the end of that shoot, I brought home like 3 pounds of bacon just so I could use that line.
Yes. That's awesome.
But so in terms of like perks of the job, that's always been one of my favorites because it was just like it was such a fun like first thing to do. But then I was bouncing around in reality television for a few months because that's what's most readily available is the reality TV stuff. And then I got my first I don't know if I would call it my big break, but my first movie that I worked on was like a friend of a friend of a friend was saying like, hey, our PA just ghosted the production. Do you have anybody that can start tomorrow? And I was like, I am so unemployed right now. I'm there.
Got it.
And so I literally like I brought in my resume. I went to the interview and I talked to like 2 people and they were like, yeah, your resume looks good. Can you start tomorrow? I was like, yes, I can.
Yes. I got you.
And that was honestly a lot of times what it is that you have to just be available. You have to be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
So
Gotcha.
so I got that. And then when that movie was finishing up, just a couple of people on that show just said, hey, you send me your resume and I will send it out to everybody that I know, saying like, this is a good PA. Because
That's really cool.
there's a million PAs in Hollywood, but apparently there are not a million good PAs in Hollywood. So when you find somebody that's good, then you want to pass along their information. So
Yeah. Well, and then, you being the good PA has somebody who's already respected passing your resume around. Like,
exactly.
that's
It means a
awesome.
lot more coming from somebody else than coming from me. In fact, it's
Right.
kind of funny because I didn't apply for either of my next 2 jobs. I didn't apply for my job at Malpaso and I didn't apply for my job at Marvel. Those were just like my resume landed on somebody's desk because it was still circulating for some reason.
Oh, wow.
Like I remember when I was at Malpaso, I had a friend that was leaving a show at Disney, a pretty big one, and she was saying, I'm sorting through PA resumes to replace me and yours just came across my desk. Are you looking for work right now? And I was like,
That's
no,
awesome.
I'm working. But so it's really funny because it was just kind of like making the rounds, like, and somebody was saying, oh yeah, I got it from this production company, and I was like, I don't know anybody at that production company. How did they get it?
That's awesome.
But it's kind of fun because once you're in and once people like you, they do take care of you, which is nice because it can kind of feel like you're on your own a lot when you're in this industry. Almost everybody in the entertainment industry is actually working freelance. So, there are people that are employed by studios, they're accounting and legal and marketing and franchise and certain people that are, employed year round and have salaries that are from different studios. But most of the people involved in production, so that's from the PAs up to, the camera operators, the sound boom people, and then right on up to like, the directors are working freelance. They're just bouncing around between gigs and hoping that, their friends don't forget about them and they're on a show for a really long time.
Yeah, I guess so.
So it can be a little bit anxiety inducing when you're working freelance and you don't really know where your next job's coming from. But so it's really nice when it feels like people are looking out for you.
Yeah, it kind of gives you that like comfort that somebody's there.
Yeah, which is a very nice thing to be able to feel in an industry where there is not much stability.
Okay, did we discuss, maybe I somehow missed it. Did you mention what kind of schooling you had to do for your position that you're working in?
You don't need any specific schooling to be in the
Okay.
position I'm in, or honestly to be anywhere in the industry. There are some positions where schooling might help, like being actually going to film school and stuff like that. Maybe like cinematographers or
Yeah.
people that have technical aspects to their work. But for most people in the industry, the biggest thing that like going to a film school gets you is the connections.
Okay.
So the good film schools are the ones that have a big alumni base that's always looking to hire from their school.
Okay.
So
Yep.
I went to UCLA, but I did not do. I took some of the film and television classes because I was interested, but I was not a film and television major. I ended up minoring in film and television because I took so many of the classes. But I don't know that I really needed or have used any of those skills specifically. I'd say the biggest good thing that I got from that was that like I know some of the terminology, so I didn't have to Google as much. Like when the
Okay.
jargon starts getting thrown around,
Sure.
I don't have to Google all of it. But there's also great resources online for all of this stuff. Like when I first started looking for PA work, I was looking at there's a website called the Anonymous Production Assistant, which is a really interesting resource. It's just somebody who talks about their experiences as a PA. And there's a lot of resources and stuff on there as well. And they have, lists of terminology that you need to know and like equipment that you need to have and all this kind of stuff. So
Oh,
that's pretty interesting stuff. And then there's a lot of Facebook groups that was where I was getting work from that are, like I need a production assistant and stuff like that.
that's actually kind of cool. Like, I've been very impressed with the way Facebook groups have turned into ways to do business and ways to find jobs and ways to like there's so much you can
To
do with
network,
Facebook groups. It's crazy.
I mean, it's how you guys found me.
That's totally true. We found you in a Facebook group. It's awesome.
It's definitely, that was where I found like there's a lot of the unscripted, the reality TV show that will
right?
post. They need like local
Sure.
PAs tomorrow, kind of a thing.
Of course, yeah.
So that was where I was getting most of my work early on, because the bigger jobs, the ones that are at studios or the ones that are on bigger shows, those ones you generally do need to know somebody. Like somebody needs to recommend you to it.
Yeah.
So meeting people is half the battle, and timing and luck is also big.
Yeah, I bet.
And being good at your
Okay.
job.
Well, yeah, I mean that definitely goes a long way, especially if you can get your name backed by somebody because of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that goes a long way.
Well, and when you think about it, it's really cool that so much of it is based off of your reputation and how good of work you do. It's always good to know that your job is based off of how well you work as opposed to what degree you have or
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things. I feel like a lot of times people are intimidated by getting into the Hollywood scene, because it is very cliquey, I guess. I was talking about how nice it is to like have people taking care of you, and like once you're in, but like getting in is hard. And I was
Right.
lucky that it only took me about 6 months of bouncing around before I, was able to
Wow.
get my first job. But like there, I have friends that were bouncing around, have been going around for like a couple years. So I'm very lucky that I'm where I am today.
Yeah, and that you that you had the timing lined up really well. That's really, really cool.
Yeah, I remember. So I finished at Mount Paso last year at the very beginning of December, and I had this thought because I had been working for almost the whole year, and I was like, I'm just gonna take the rest of December off. I'm gonna like travel. I'm going to go visit my partner's family out on the East Coast. I'm going to go spend some time with my family up north. Just take the rest of December off and then send out my resume in the new year, send it to all my friends, be like, Happy New Year. I just got off this show. Hire me. One of those things. And so that was my plan. But I remember I was like less than a week into my time off, and I got a call from the man who would later be my production mom. And he called, and I just got this call, and, he said his name, and he said, we are looking to staff up our Los Angeles post-production office. We're looking for an editorial PA. I'm with Marvel Studios. Are you interested in coming in to interview? And I remember very vividly, I was wearing an Avengers t-shirt when I got this phone call.
How perfect.
And I was like in the car driving back from visiting my family. And I was just like, yes, I would like an interview. When should I come in?
Yes.
And it took 3 interviews. And then I just actually recently celebrated 1 year. And by celebrated, I mean, forgot that it was my 1 year anniversary there until Facebook told me. But, I've now been at Marvel for a year, and I'm just so lucky to be with such a kind and fun crew. They're great. And I really like it.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode with LeeAnn on Movie Magic. I wanted to thank you so much, LeeAnn, for talking with us today. And to all of our listeners, I wanted to say Happy Excelsior Day. It is Friday, December 28th. So don't forget to talk nerdy to us. Public House Media has a new address, www.publichousemedia.org. So head there to check out our show page and all the other great shows Public House Media has to offer. I'm Lindsay.
I'm LeeAnn.
And I'm Emily. And thanks for getting nerdy with us on Beauties and Headcanons.